This is Barney Wong with one Tiny Drop. I have episode 2 prepared, and I looked at it and I felt there were a couple of things that were missing, and I want to include this in this prologue. So sorry that if I'm taking this video past the 20 minutes, but hopefully this prologue will make it a richer context to go into the material in episode 2. Just a couple of, there are two things that were missing. The first one is credits. I want to give credit to John Vervaeke in the series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis video series that he has posted. It's a spectacular series, and I will include the credits, which particular videos he speaks about opponent processing and the aspirational S2 and the here and now S1. And thank you, John, for your work and for your series of 50 videos. The second one is the credit to the Tao Te Ching and the yin-yang sign. And that inspired me in my interpretation of connecting the two balloons with the stem in the middle. And that has to do with the yin. As it collapses, it feeds the yang, and as the yang collapses, it feeds the yin. So that is another credit I want to attribute to this work. So I want to provide a richer context for this journey as we unpack as to how do we get to use the ideal process in non-ideal condition. And I think that two stories, a macro story and understory. And I think the macro story is something that we all can relate to, where if we're concerned with climate, there is a want that comes from that, and there is a existing condition that comes from that. And that want is we want to be actors in a sustainable planet. And again, this is a secular approach towards the climate change. But for those that do not believe in climate change, I have something else to offer, and it has to do with a sense of adaptiveness towards the changes that is causing us to hold on to our maladaptive patterns. So for those in that crowd, in this participants, please hold off your judgments on this. But for those that are concerned with the planet, we have this want where we want to be actors in a sustainable planet. And where we are at is that we are actually spectators, or what it feels like that we're at, of an ailing planet. So between these two is the gap. On the macro level, this is what this episode or this series is looking at. How can we resolve that gap right there, or close the gap, where we can make this bridge from this state of our current state into this state where we're actors and we can bring about a sustainable planet. However, I think what's more interesting is that there's an understory to it. And I'll share an analogy, and again, it's just an analogy that would describe what that understory is. I remember watching a documentary where there's a tribe in Africa, and the documentary captured how they trapped monkeys as protein. And the documentary, they showed that they built a hollow mound. This tribe built a hollow mound where there was an opening in the hollow mound. And in it, they put a I think it was a fruit or something sweet, and let's say we'll use a banana. So what happens is that the monkey comes along, they can smell this fruit, and they insert the hand to grab this fruit. Now the ingenious part about this trap is that this opening is only big enough to put your hands through when you collapse your finger. But when you grab the fruit and try to pull your hand out, it will not fit, and that opening is not big enough for it. So the amazing part about this is the tribe, they devised this because they recognize, this is the monkey for instance, and the arm connected to it. They devised it where there is a maladaptive behavior or pattern when the monkey sees a threat coming towards them, such as the tribe about to net them. They pull the hand out and they refuse to let go this banana. So effectively, they are stuck. So they refuse to let go and they're pulling it, and they struggle. Or there's time that works against them as they struggle. So in some ways, this analogy, again, this is just an analogy. This is not a discourse on creationism versus evolution. It's an analogy to show that we are in a similar situation where this understory takes us into this place where there's a gap. And here we are looking to be free to adapt to situations, especially in a situation where we have COVID, we have the climate and the pending symptoms of the climate collapsing on us. How do we adapt to all these new threats, this new imposing threats that we have kept away or it never showed up on our radar? But this is where we are. We are just like this situation where we are here holding on to our current ways of maintaining our equanimity. And we have this hunter, which is representing the new threats or the threats that are coming down the pike. And we're unable to extract ourselves from the prize of equanimity. And we are unable to adapt to the situation. So we're stuck right here in this maladaptive way. Adaptive. Yep, that's how you spell it. In a maladaptive way. So I just want to give a personal context for those who are concerned with the planet and truly see that we are on an ailing planet. That is the big picture. But on the personal journey for all of us, no matter whether you believe in an ailing planet or not, we are here where we do have the same needs, where we need to be adaptive. We want to be free to adapt to any threats. Because equanimity, if you look at it, is the resilience to everyday disturbances. So there is a not only adaptive property to it, which is this, but the resilience has a maladaptive property to it where we are stuck, where we we go into confirmation biases, where we go into everyday practices that avoids any of these disturbances, in the same way that we hold on to this equanimity, this banana right here. So I just want to give a short context as we journey down and we look at this gap right here on the personal level as well, that feeds into this macro level. And this is so that we can look at, we have this deeper drive and deeper incentive to look at episodes 2, 3, etc., to understand how do we get into this maladaptive place. So this is my little prologue, and I appreciate that you went beyond this 20 minutes. So I just want to end by saying that, using the words of a good conductor to any epic journey, buckle up, Dorothy. We're going to say bye-bye to Kansas. See you then. Bye-bye. Welcome back to the video series, The Climate Playbook. Today's episode 2 will be talking about non-ideal conditions. I just want to give a little overview of what we're covering today. I would like to review, just for the benefit of those joining us new, the ideal process from the last video. We'll be reviewing the 3 triggers that points to that we have choice in the matter of harm when we're chasing the appetite. And I'd like to discuss how do we compromise the ideal process in situations where there's harm beyond the moral capacity of choice. I'll also like to discuss, as part of compromising the ideal process, managing the excess harm. In other words, what happens to the harm that cannot be contained in the ideal process, and how do we manage it? And how that managing leads to the manipulation of our aspirational salience, which is S2, that second balloon. Then I'd like to finish up with wrapping up and talking about what will be in the next video, and the general housekeeping like and subscribe and commenting on the videos. So let's get going here. So I'd like to review, if you remember from episode 1, we talked about the perfect or the ideal process. And the ideal process, we have S1, which is the here and now, which is the part of us that organizes around solving the immediacy of our daily lives. Jobs, making it across town to get to a meeting, food, energy, security, etc. And then in S2 is the aspirational side. And this is where we have the part of us that gives ethical and moral consideration to any of the harm or the effects of S1, which is the here and now. As you can see, they're connected together by this stem, middle stem, where any increase in size in S1 would lead to pressure traveling into S2 that causes a reciprocal and simultaneous growth, so that as the appetite grows, the considerations for its effect also grows with that too. That's the perfect process. To finish off that perfect process, we have this scissor hands, external hands, embracing the balloons from both sides as a way to constrain, especially this balloon, from becoming a runaway train. So in this case, as S1 is getting bigger, it pushes out these hands. They rotate around these 2 pins, and it pushes and it squeezes into S2. It feels a resistance from S2 as a result of it growing. So in effect, what it does is it constrains it so that it does not become a runaway train. So that is the ideal process in a nutshell. Now let's talk about the 3 triggers from episode 1. The 3 triggers that we talked about was harm, do no harm. That's the first ideal, and the inverse of that is when we do harm, it's a trigger. The other one is personal responsibility. So the ideal here is that we take personal responsibility in the ideal process for the choices that we make, and that we have full choice in the matter. And the last thing is moral fitness. And as a result of our ideal process, we have an identity that is congruous with a morally fit society. So the flip side of it is that we do harm, we are personally responsible for harm, and that we are morally unfit. So keeping this in mind, we'll work our way into how do we work with this process in situations where it's a non-ideal condition. So take for instance, blood diamonds. Or conflict diamonds. What if you're given you're a diamond buyer, and somebody comes up to you and say, "Hey, I have this drawer full of diamonds at 50% below dealer cost or market cost or market price for dealers. However, they are blood diamonds." In this case, you can see that our appetite as one is getting bigger because we are getting more value for the money. So I'm going to just draw this red right here. And that size is created by that 50% discount that you're getting for those diamonds. So in the ideal situation, that increase in size will cause pressure to go into S2 and cause it to be similarly growing in this, increasing in size with that. So this is in a tightly coupled process. You know, like dancing, when you're in a tight embrace with your partner, and 1 inch move forward will cause your partner to move back 1 inch. But the problem with that, when it causes the S2 aspirational balloon to get bigger, it then causes you to be aware that these are blood diamonds and that it's not an attractive proposition or attractive deal. So how we manipulate the system is, how can we get S2 not to grow as S1 gets bigger? So the way we do this is, firstly, we have to find a way of making sure this gas from S1 does not make it into S2, or the pressure, I should say. That causes it to grow. That's the first strategy. The second strategy is, I want this to grow, but I don't want to feel the resistance of S2. Because the mere resistance of S2, it triggers you to feel, hey, you know, there's something immoral or something unethical about this deal. So the next strategy is, why don't we spread the arms out? And I'll call this number 2. We'll spread the arms out, find a way of spreading it out so that S1 can grow without feeling any resistance from S2. And the last thing we can do, and again, these are all mechanical strategies that I would translate into our cognitive strategies, is why don't we find a way of squeezing S2? And I'll call this strategy number 3. So as you can see, as we got this growth here that takes us beyond the moral capacity of the perfect process or the ideal process, we have to find ways to ensure that S2 does not grow in a corresponding size, or else it would trigger us in these areas. And the way we keep S2 in that pre-triggered zone is we spread the arms out for S1, the here and now. We make sure that the pressure does not make it into S2 to make it grow. And we find ways of squeezing in S2. So in considering how we can do this, I came up with this particular device. And you saw it in the introduction. And say, okay, why don't we spread this? Let's put handcuffs around both the wrists of S1's arms, and we attach a scale or a weigh basket, and we just add weights. And to take care of this right here, why don't we introduce a pinch point? And we can draw it like this. Let me get lower than that. And a pinch point is represented by a neck down. And there's a lever. And this represents the original wall. And that lever is connected to a pulley. I would say it's wrapped around a pulley and connects to that handcuff. So as we add more weights, not only the arms are spread out, but also it would activate this switch that would increase the pinch point, and that would prevent the air going, or the pressure going to S2. So finally, the last thing is, how do we manage to squeeze in to S2 so that it does not grow in size if we have any leaks that make it past that pinch point? So I'm going to just illustrate the basic concept. Why don't we we move this pin to this location right here. This is a new location. And to illustrate the concept, it has to do with leverage, like a seesaw. So in the perfect process, or ideal process, we have the fulcrum in the middle, where 1 inch going up leads to 1 inch going down. And that's a tightly coupled system. Now, if we move that fulcrum, and that fulcrum, by the way, represents this point because it's in between. If we move it right here,
instead of 1 inch, now we can have 6 inches or so to every 1 inch of movement. So what we have done is we have allowed this to travel 6 inches for every 1 inch of squeeze. 6 inch of spread, 1 inch of squeeze. And that's what we have done right here. We just simply move the pin to that point. So what we have accomplished is we have compromised the ideal process so as to manage the harm that is beyond the ideal process capacity to deal with without triggering the 3 triggers. So what does this look like if I take this and explain it in a chart? On the mechanical side, and this is on the cognitive side, or the salient side, these are weights right here. And the weights on the salient side, our habits are actually the weights that fudge the ideal process in non-ideal conditions. So right here we have habits. The next one is the spread. Sorry, the next one is this pinch point. And I'll put PT just to abbreviate. And that pinch point represents veils that I will be talking about in the next video. And as you can see, as we add more habits to the scale, it not only increases the spread, but also it pulls on the switch so as to squeeze down this tube so that the gas or the pressure does not make it to S2. And lastly, we have the squeeze right here. Sorry, I'm saying this is this. We still number 2. This is number 1. Number 2, we have the spread. And the spread is what I call the bigger appetite, or the appetite that takes us in a place where we cannot take the burden of personal responsibility for the harm, and we have to find ways of bearing the harm. And the third one is this right here, which is the squeeze. And that represents these pins moving from here to here, here to here. That is actually, we build immunity around our habits so that we can commit the habit to completion with less and less sensitivity to the harm, and finally we don't feel the harm at all. So that is all I have for today for this 15 to 20 minute video. So to wrap up, for the next video we'll be talking about habits and veils and how they afford us the bigger appetite and immunity to the harm, and how the veils, they bury the harm in a way that we don't feel the exposure so as to arouse our aspirational side. This is the epilogue section of the video, and I want to take this opportunity to bring it all in. Why should we care about the material that we had just seen in terms of the manipulation of the ideal process? And
where is it leading to, and what is the payoff? So we talked about the ideal process, and when it's left by its own design, its natural design, we abort the blood diamonds, knowing that we are salient enough, our salient balloon is big enough to pick up the extent and the nuances of harm. And in that ideal process, we will abort that deal. But in the non-ideal condition, we want to commit to purchasing the blood diamonds, but at the same time, we want to also have clean hands, as if we did not commit harm. And as the result of that, we had to manipulate the ideal process with all the devices that are attached to the habit weight scale. So what is our personal, let's bring it something personal and very close to us. What is our personal conflict diamonds that we commit on a regular basis? And one of the things that I thought of is avocados. And one of the things I recently came across is a documentary called The Avocado War, by a series called The Rotten on Netflix. And one of the complications we as consumers in the global north is we have now insisted our grocers carry all year round avocados. So we have all year round avocados, and I remember the time where we ate avocados when they were in season, and we did not insist on all year round avocados. Well, some of the harm that this documentary highlighted was there was harm to water rights, especially in southern America, like Chile, for instance, harm to water rights, where water, and I think avocado is it's an intensive or water-intensive product, where water had to be diverted away from streams that fed into other farmers, and they were small-time farmers or people that lived on the land, and it was to the point where the creeks were bone dry. They had to ship in water on a weekly basis, and it came out of that pocket. The other issue that it brought up, and this is harm that we don't normally see with eating avocados all year round, is it created a land grab where conglomerations were buying large parcels of land, and it was causing issues with pasturing and farming with the other farmers. And it's when a person loses their water rights, they oftentimes abandon their land. And the last one is in Mexico especially, is organized crime, where avocado is now seen as the green gold. So avocado, something that is innocuous and a daily staple, can produce all these harms that we might not consider the harm, but when we do consider the harm, we bring it into our perspectives. It gives us a clash of perspectives with the benefit and the harm, and hopefully in the ideal process, it's salient. So with the avocado, you might say, okay, great. I know about the problem. I watched a documentary. Now I know it's an issue. Just like I've found religion with plastic bags and plastic in general, I'm going to stop eating avocados all year round and just eat during the summer season. This is interesting because how does it tie into our resilience? And remember, we had this chart right here where we want to be free to adapt to threats, but where we are is that we are stuck and we are maladapted. Because like that monkey in the dome, it was holding on to the equanimity,
and has remained stuck in this maladapted place. And right here is that gap. What is that gap that we're seeing? Well, there are two sides to resilience, especially the adaptive side. And in resilience, we have a reactionary aspect of it. So in the avocado war, we say, okay, I am now schooled in the harm that was kept away. Now the documentary has brought it on. I will respond to it, and I'll just eat on season rather than off season. So you can turn this on and off. So you might say, okay, what's the big deal? Where's that gap when we have this ability to turn on and turn off our behavior, adaptation behavior, based on information as the information is made salient to us? There's another side, and this is very important that we're going through this exercise of understanding how we manipulate salience. There is a preventive aspect, our ability to adapt to threats. And one example is like dams. Nobody's going to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to prevent dams bursting. We'll just clean up the town as many times as a dam bursts. We'll just clean up the town. Lives lost, well, I'm sure generations can make it up later. That's absurd, because there are certain threats where the scale, the coordination, the indirect threat where it's not easy to detect requires us to have this adaptive behavior around prevention. It's not something where we can turn on and turn off easily. And this, I would like to propose, is that gap. And the way we understand that gap, or what is causing that gap and how we can close that gap, is we have to go into each of these exercises of where we manipulate the ideal process so we can get a new cognitive grammar around this. Grammar. Around this preventive aspect of our adaptive behavior in resilience. So we're literally going through these exercises to build a new scaffolding, for lack of a better word, so that we can obtain this new cognitive grammar, the organization of our thoughts, organization of sequences, cause and effect, inputs and outputs, prioritization, and how we keep salient and not salient, so that we can go into why are we poor in this aspect when we're really great at this. So tying it in, we can see that our preventive part of all this, there is some major harm that we cannot turn on and turn off. Loss of biodiversity. Once it's gone, it's not easy to turn it back on, unlike the avocado war. Next one is societal collapse. And that could be climate refugees. That also could be desertification. Again, these are things that we cannot turn on and turn off, just like the avocado example. So this is where we're going to. We're trying to understand the much hidden and structural harm that we don't normally see in that column right there. And lastly, which is huge, trauma. The hidden trauma. Oftentimes, people carry that trauma, and that trauma, through epigenetics, get passed down. So it's important that we have the cognitive grammar so that we can see how we are locked out from seeing this harm based on our current cognitive grammar that deals with reactionary, but it locks us out from seeing this much indirect harm that has a much larger scale. It requires greater coordination, and there's a huge lagging effect that we need to prevent. It makes sense to prevent, just like a dam, than to just have it burst on a repeated basis. And then finally, I just want to mention that in summary, we are great with the grammar of prevention, of reaction, but we're weak in the grammar of prevention. That locks us out from seeing much more innocuous threats that would mature to where we cannot contain, we don't have the resources or the capability or the technology to contain. So this is what we're going after, and hopefully this is all going to bring home why we're going through understanding the non-ideal process and why we manipulate our salience as a way to chase after the equanimity that leads us to a maladaptive blind spot where we cannot see all these innocuous and often indirect threats. So, just to wrap it up, I want to bring up some housekeeping. Please, if you like the video, click a like on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And I'll give a week between postings on YouTube, between video postings or uploads, for you to comment. So thank you very much for episode 2, and I'll see you in episode 3.